Hello, everybody, and welcome to the STEM Space podcast. I'm Dr. Natasha Wilkerson, and I'm excited to be having a live recording of the STEM Space. And we have a special guest from VEX Robotics. So you can see here Jason McKenna. He's an educator, author, and advocate for innovative and equitable learning practices. Jason is the Vice President of Global Educational Strategy at VEX Robotics. He helms the strategic direction of educational platforms within the VEX continuum, with a focus of integrating STEM, technology, and creative thinking into education. Jason is passionate about empowering teachers and preparing students for the demands of a rapidly changing world. Welcome, Jason, to the STEM Space.
Thank you very much for having me. Appreciate being here.
And for those that are just listening, I want them to know that you are in a kind of classroom and you're surrounded by all the different robots. Tell us a little bit about where you are and what's in front of you.
So thank you. Yeah, so this is the VEX Classroom. We actually built this during the pandemic, which, as we are all painfully aware, students went from learning in classrooms to their living rooms. So we wanted to create an environment to help teachers to continue to engage in hands-on STEM learning with VEX products. So we actually created this classroom here so that we could do some of the heavy lifting for the teachers. That was, as you remember, such turbulent times. So we created this classroom. And then since then, we also now use it for much of our curriculum development. So if we want to use a direct instruction video in our curriculum, we would use this particular classroom. I could go to my computer view, or I can go to an overhead view if I want to show the robot running. I could write things on the board that's behind me. So as you mentioned, we try to replicate a classroom as best as we can. For today's podcast, for those of you that are just listening, I actually have most of the VEX continuum here in front of me. So we've worked really hard over the last 3 to 4 years to build out an entire really kindergarten through college solution with our products. So when I'm doing a webinar or a podcast where I'm not talking about one particular product line, I like to show off the entire continuum that we have here.
Can you give us an idea of what sets VEX Robotics apart? So if they can't see it, can you kind of explain what is a VEX robot?
Yeah, so what I like to explain to people is that VEX, I pride ourselves on leading the world and creating meaningful learning engagements for students. I was a classroom teacher for 20 years, and I fell in love with teaching STEM, not because I'm a tinkerer or an engineer, if there's anything wrong with engineers. It has nothing to do with that. I was always a humanities person. In my free time, I'm reading or doing something like that. As a matter of fact, in terms of my engineering skills, I can barely change a light bulb. But I fell in love with this because the things that I had difficulty doing in my normal day-to-day job, whether it was collaboration, whether it was having students find multiple solutions to problems, whether it was, taking students beyond a surface level understanding to a more conceptual understanding. When I was able to introduce a robot into my classroom, all those things became easier. I talk about in my book, the very first robotics lesson I taught, it was a very simple exercise. I had my students code the robot to move in a square, and I had 4 groups of students, and every group had a different solution to that task. And that's when I fell in love with teaching STEM. And not only that, but the students were all very much engaged. They were on task. They were having conversations about the coding challenge. They were having conversations about the robot. And up until that point, I was probably the worst teacher in the world at teaching group work. I would put 3 students in a group, and one student would do everything, one student would sleep, and the third student would normally be doing something they weren't supposed to be doing. But when I introduced the robot, they all became engaged. So I think what really sets us apart is we work very hard at creating these meaningful learning experiences, but importantly, being able to do that at each individual student's instructional level. So you could use our VEX 123 platform if you're a pre-reader, or if you have if you cannot use a mouse or you can't use a computer, you don't have a device, this gives you the opportunity to do that. But even if you want to do something very advanced and learn about factory automation, you can use our CTE program. So providing students with those meaningful learning experiences, but importantly, allowing them to do it at their individual instructional level, that's what really sets us apart.
Who are these platforms intended for? Is it for a STEM classroom, an after-school program? Who are your primary audience?
All the above. The thing I say all the time is I'm very lucky with my job at VEX. I've been able to talk to teachers and classrooms on every single continent. And the only thing that's consistent about STEM and computer science is that there is nothing consistent about it. You have people that want to do STEM as an after school activity. You have people that want to incorporate an individual STEM class and do it every day for a school year. You have people that want to take an elementary math and science class and show students the real world applications of what they're learning and have them do a STEM assignment embedded within those classrooms. You have people that want to do STEM as a special. So the students go to art and they go to library and they go to music and then they do STEM. So they want it on a rotation of every 4 to 5 days. You want people that want to have a maker space and have different kids and different students go to the maker space whenever it fits their particular schedule. So my job is to try to make sure that our solutions, whether it's a product or it's our curriculum or if it's our teacher professional development, is able to hit all of those areas.
Can you give us an example of a lesson? Because the robotics, like you said, can be so many different things.
Mm-hmm.
The coding, the building. Tell us, what does the curriculum look like?
So our curriculum, it's some of it is dependent upon the platform, right? So if you're going to use our VEX IQ system, which is our plastic-based construction system, there's going to be a lot of engineering involved in that. So students are going to have an opportunity to build mechanisms. Students are going to have an opportunity to do some coding. And the way that we have the curriculum structured is, if you wanted to do something that was more engineering focused, we give you a 9 or an 18-week scope and sequence that's more engineering focused. If you want to do something that's more coding focused, so you don't want to do as much building, but you want to use the robot to explore sensors, and you want to use the robot to do some autonomous path planning and really make those abstract computer science concepts more concrete, we can give you a scope and sequence that focuses on coding. If you want to do truly STEM, in which you have a challenge where students have to do both the engineering and coding, we give you a scope and sequence along those lines. But if you're using a product like VEX AIM or VEX 123 that's more computer science focused, we'll do that. We'll focus on the computer science, but depending upon the age range, right? So VEX 123 is designed more for elementary students. We'll do computer science, but we'll also show how computer science can be integrated into a language arts classroom. And we'll have computer science integrated into a math classroom. So using computing to learn or to explore the core academic classes, we have curriculum for that also. So a lot of it is dependent, again, upon the actual product itself, but it's also dependent upon the age range. But the kind of the unifying theme that we have for all of our curriculum, kind of like our guidelines for it, is we want our curriculum to have a very low barrier of entry. So students can come in and they can have success right away, but we also want to have a very high ceiling. So those students that want to explore concepts further, we don't want them to reach that artificial ceiling. And then lastly, we want to have wide walls. We want to make sure that our curriculum is appealing to students from all different places and of all different interests.
I remember doing a Project Lead the Way training where I was introduced to VEX Robotics. And in this training, there were teachers that had history backgrounds. You mentioned humanities. Yeah. And there was this big intimidation factor.
Yeah.
Because I remember the kit we had came in this big toolbox, and it had gears and all these different motors, and it was a little overwhelming. And so what do you have to say to teachers that are a little intimidated by robotics and all these pieces?
Yeah, so was I. When I first got started, I was intimidated also. But and honestly, that's one of the reasons why I wrote my book. If you think about that, and if you think about why teachers feel intimidated when they get started with something like STEM or they get started with something like robotics, oftentimes it's because we as teachers, we feel like we have to have all the answers, right? If a student has an answer like, oh, how do I build a 4-bar lift, or how do I code this particular algorithm to do this thing, and what does this particular piece do, or what does this particular part do, and we don't know the answer to that question, we feel like as a failure as a teacher. We grew up in classrooms, or at least I grew up in classrooms, in which the teacher was the sage on the stage. He or she knew everything. We would ask the question and they would immediately know the answer to that particular question. But now we know in the world that we live in now, that's not really a good model for our students. Instead, having you and your students explore different things and find things together, that's a really powerful pedagogy that we can use with our students to really explore things different way, and to also help our students cultivate this idea, that failure is just feedback. So being able to do something and then to fail at something and to be able to learn from that and to try again, that's a very important feature that we need in the real world, but oftentimes is not shown in our classroom, because in our classrooms, we have this very linear formula, whereas we start here and everybody is supposed to end up in one specific spot, and everyone really goes on the same journey to reach that spot. But whereas in a STEM classroom, that journey is much more robust, and there's many different things that you can explore, and there's many different ways that you can explore it. So that fear, that intimidation that you speak of, it's really evidence of a much larger problem of how we train our teachers, and how our teachers also have to have this STEM mindset that we're trying to also reach with our students.
Yes, I love that. And you mentioned failure is just feedback.
Mm-hmm.
That is so good. And I see people are watching. So if anyone out there has questions for Jason, whether it's about robotics or teaching in general, STEM education, you can put it in the comments. So I want to go to your book, What STEM Can Do for Your Classroom.
Mm-hmm.
STEM is such a broad word, and here we're talking about robotics specifically, but I'm getting the sense that STEM means more to you than just a robotics kit. So can you tell us more about your kind of view of STEM education?
Yeah, I talk about it in the introduction to my book. Two things. Number one, I was I originally got into STEM. So just a little bit about my context and my story. About year 15 in my teaching career, I was completely and totally burned out, for a lot of different reasons that we don't have to get into right now. But I was burned out. And as I mentioned a few moments ago, STEM, and that first lesson I did with coding the robot in the square, it really reinvigorated me, and it really helped me, capture what was lost for me, in my teaching career. And then when I fast forward a few years after that, I was at my very first VEX World competition. And what we do at VEX Worlds is the students compete in the dome, and it's like a rock concert. There's 10,000 people there watching the finals, and the kids are competing with their robots. And then after the champion is crowned, we then unveil next year's game. So now the students have an opportunity to see what next year's game is going to be. And the students are, again, they're absolutely losing their mind. They're so enthusiastic. And I was walking out of that arena with the co-founder of VEX Robotics, Bob Mimlich, and he said to me, these students have no idea how much work they just signed up for. And when he said that to me, it's like he hit me with a 2x4 across my face, because as a teacher, that's the magic elixir that we're all looking for. How do we combine that rigor? How do we combine that learning? How do we combine students being persistent and that, but also with that engagement and fun? How do we put all those things together? If we could put that into a bottle, how do we put it in the classroom? And I just saw that with like 12,000 kids in an auditorium watching the unveiling of that year's game. So how do we actually do that? And to me, that's what STEM is, to your question, is how are we able to combine rigor and engagement and persistence and things like the engineering design process with those high levels of engagement and fun. And the reason why I think you can have the high levels of engagement and fun is with STEM. I talk about the aboutness of STEM. And what I mean by that is STEM answers that question of like, what is this about? What am I doing here? Like the idea of curiosity and wonder, which sadly is oftentimes missing from so many of our classrooms. That's what STEM is able to bring in. Students have the opportunity to think about things deeply, to ask questions about things. That's where I talk about the aboutness of STEM. It's the complexity of our world that oftentimes we try to strip away in our classrooms. STEM is an invitation to bring that complexity back into the classroom, but do it in a way, again, that is fun and engaging for our students, and allow our students to explore the aboutness, to ask those questions, and really give them an opportunity to find those answers on their own.
I love that. And I've heard a lot from teachers, and you can see it, news articles and social media, that teachers are burnt out and they're complaining that students aren't engaged. And there's just like this hunger right now in education to change things up. And I'm hoping that this STEM movement is coming at a time that I guess my frustration is I often see administrators put STEM for certain kids. Oh, these are the gifted and talented students, so they get STEM education. Or let's have an exclusive after-school club. This was in my school, and that's going to be the robotics program. And I had to fight so hard to make it STEM for every kid. Like, everyone should experience this, and we should pull in the math teachers and the science teachers and the history teachers, and transform education in the way we think of it. Because like you mentioned, it's like this rote memorization and just forcing kids, they're fighting that now.
That's
and so what advice do you have for teachers that are like, yes, this is what I need, how do I bring this to my classroom?
So I think two points there. Well, we've worked very hard when VEX got started. I told the story of Bob Dimlich. Our other co-founder is Tony Norman, who's our CEO. When VEX first got started, VEX was just in the after-school space. And that meant the big metal robotics platforms, which, to your earlier point, are very intimidating for a lot of teachers, and they can also be very expensive. So one of the reasons why we've worked so hard at this VEX Continuum, if you're watching the podcast, you can see the continuum in front of me today. But if you're not watching, you can go to vexrobotics.com and you can see the continuum on our homepage. One of the reasons why we did this was so that to bring the barrier of entry lower, right? So now you can literally get started with VEX for free, and that's the virtual robot at vr.vex.com. We actually created that during the pandemic because we wanted teachers and students to still have an option to experience VEX when they obviously couldn't collaborate and do many of the hands-on things that were going on in classrooms before the pandemic. So you can get started with VEX right now for free if your school is having, budgetary issues, or you want to experience our curriculum, or if you want to experience our professional development wrapped around a VEX product. You can get started with our virtual robotics system, and it's a very low barrier of entry for you. Then you can move on to products like VEX 123 and VEX Go, which are obviously much lower cost options for you to go ahead and get started with VEX. It doesn't really matter what age or what grade you are. It allows you just to get started with the VEX platform. It allows you to do, again, the hands-on collaborative work. Even if you're in an upper elementary or even a high school classroom, if you have the budget to do like our CT robotic system or our EXP robotic system, great. But this continuum, what it allows you to do is it allows you to find the right product. I talked earlier about for the students' instructional needs, but also what your needs are for a teacher and what you're comfortable with. You might not be comfortable with doing metal robotic systems yet. That's okay. Get started with our plastic-based system, or get started with a product like VEX AIM, which there's no construction with at all. You have budgetary issues, no problem. Get started with VEX Code VR. It's completely and totally free. Or use VEX Code VR to supplement your physical robot so you don't have to do that large of an outlay with the physical robotic system. So we've worked very hard to kind of build those solutions out for you so that you don't have to do so much of that heavy lifting on your own. The last thing I'll mention to that end is we have an entire website called research.vex.com that has the research to back up a lot of the claims that we make around our educational platforms and also our hardware platforms. So when we say things like, the VEX Continuum is a great means to introduce young students to computer science and STEM concepts, and then allow them to grow in a scaffolded manner so that students then have an easy pathway to hopefully continue to grow their STEM skills. We have actual research to back up those particular claims. And we say things like drive forward is the new hello world. meaning that providing students with a hands-on robotic system is a great way to take these abstract concepts in computer science and make them more concrete. We have research to actually back that up and show that. So administrators are always interested in that, and that's why we have an entire page, research.vex.com, devoted to that.
As an education researcher, thank you. That makes me so happy. And all the things you're saying on like supporting scaffolding to abstract concepts. Oh my gosh, I love it. Because that's one of my biggest complaints about STEM education is we keep doing these repetitive activities and we never are really thinking about the intentional learning outcomes of why are we teaching this? Where are we going? What's the goal? And a question here. You are, the global education strategist, right? You're the VP of this, thinking of all these different schools around the world are using VEX. What's something surprising in your travels in looking at different classrooms that's come up in how different countries approach STEM and robotics?
Yeah, so I mentioned to you that the implementation of STEM is very different, but the challenges are all 100% the same. I'll go to, I talked about Manila. I was there in August of last year. And you go and they say, well, we know in the US, your teachers are able to do this, for example, but, our teachers might particularly struggle with this. Or in the US, your schools, all have computers and you have great Wi-Fi, so you're able to do this, but, our schools don't have it. I'm like, no, I'm like, that's not the case at all. We have schools in rural and urban areas that have a very difficult time getting devices. Teachers are in the US are just as intimidated as you are here sometimes of teaching with robotics. So oftentimes the obstacles, no matter where you are exactly the same. We have to be able to empower teachers. We have to show teachers that they are supported. We have to show students that we have a solution that's able to fit, again, their instructional level and not create an artificial level and expect all students to be able to get there. And then the last thing is around accessibility, right? So you made a very important point earlier. STEM should be for all, and computer science should be for all. So what does all actually mean, right? It's very important as a curriculum developer, as a product company, and as a teacher, we actually think about what that means, and we actually think very deeply about what all means. So how does a visually impaired student interact with a VEX robotic system, or interact with VEX Code, our coding software, or interact with our curriculum? How do we prepare teachers to also do that? How do we have students that are, up and down the spectrum be able to interact with our products effectively? We actually partnered with CAST, the nonprofit that made the Universal Design for Learning standards, to get our professional development certified and to actually go through that process with them so that we could understand what all means, so that we could help make these product and solutions effective for all. So that's really the main thing, is that whereas the implementation of STEM can be very different, the challenges are the same. We have to be able to support our teachers. We have to be able to meet our students at their instructional levels, and we have to be thinking intentionally about all of our students.
A final question here. What is one of your favorite VEX Robotics lessons or activities?
Oh, wow. Favorite VEX Robotics lesson or activities? Well, I guess, we were talking before the show started about your background in space. I think we do have a Mars rover activity that we do with both VEX Go and VEX 123, which is one of my favorite activities, which is students code their robot to identify, basically it's the Mars rover, to identify different samples on Mars, which are identified by the sensors on the robot, and then to collect those samples and then take them back to the base. And the robot has to be able to autonomously be able to go back to the base based upon the code that you provide to it. It's a great activity because I think it ties into a lot of the great aspects of STEM. There's coding and there's engineering involved. I have to be able, with the VEX Go robot, to create the right attachment on the robot to actually pick up the samples. It's connected to the real world, something that's going on right now, and allows students to explore those things in an authentic way. So that's one of my favorite activities.
Okay, so I lied. One more question.
Okay.
What are you excited about in the future? What's next for VEX Robotics?
So one of the things I'm excited about in the immediate future is our educators conference that we have upcoming in May. You can find more information about that at conference.vex.com. It takes place during VEX Worlds, which is the world's largest robotics competition. Over 20,000 students will be in Dallas, Texas over the course of the 2 weeks, representing over 50 countries. And as part of VEX Worlds, we also have, again, our VEX Robotics Educators Conference. It's the opportunity for educators, STEM educators from all over the country and all over the world to come and to learn with us and from us about STEM education that we've been talking about in many of these different VEX platforms. So I'm excited for both of those things in the immediate future. The VEX Robotics World Championships and also our VEX Educators Conference. Moving down the line, we are just getting ready to release this product. Well, I'm pointing, but if you're listening, our VEX AIM product, which is our new computer science product. So building out our computer science continuum. We've built out the STEM continuum, but really building out the computer science continuum. That's something I am very excited about, and giving students more opportunities to do computer science in fun and engaging ways over the course of this year and into next year. That's what I'm really excited about.
Awesome. Well, I'm excited. I'm excited to try out that Mars rover challenge with my Space Club students. Thank you so much, Jason, for joining me today.
Thank you for having me. I really appreciate the time.
All right. Bye-bye.